Hi guys, my name is Desiree Fuentes. I am the Uncatechized Catholic, and today I am going to do a video talking to you guys about Catholic femininity. Before we jump into that topic, I do have to tell you this video is sponsored. It is sponsored by the movie Wildcat, which is the movie about the life and writings of Flannery O'Connor. It is a really great movie. I've seen it twice now. I absolutely loved it. It's an artsy film. It's very interesting and very different than any other movie that is in theaters currently. It is coming out this month, May, and it is a smaller budget production with limited theater release. So check out the link in the description for this video to find out which theater is closest to you that you can get tickets at. I wanted to talk about femininity because I have seen a lot of discussions about femininity today, and all of these topics tend to revolve around one kind of woman. She's a woman who's submissive to her husband. She has a whole gaggle of children and chickens, and she collects her eggs every morning. She wears prairie dresses, she veils. She is a stay-at-home mom who doesn't work, or if she does work, it's a very nominal work from home, small income to support her husband or her hobbies sort of thing. But that's just not everything that a woman is. Now, are any of those things bad? No. But along with those things tends to come this idea that a woman is meant to be just meek, gentle, kind, slow, compassionate, just soft. Are any of these qualities bad? Of course not. But femininity is not just one note. Though she's not a saint, Flannery O'Connor and her writings are the perfect metaphor for this type of woman that I'm talking about. Many are used to the flowery, romantic, easy reading type of books, but Flannery didn't write stuff like that. And if you've read her stuff, you know, it can be kind of a lot to take in. Her works can be jarring to many, and in truth, they were rejected by many audiences for a very long time, despite being critically acclaimed almost from the start. Women on the whole are similar. For centuries, the feminine genius was disrespected and suppressed. Who knows how many great female minds have just been lost to time because these women were not allowed to read or write or teach. The fact of the matter is, historically speaking, the secular world rejected women, but the Creator did not reject us. Fortunately, some brilliant female minds did manage to withstand the test of time. Women who were different from the lovely woman described at the beginning of this video, and just as worthy of honor and praise as she is. For this video, I'm specifically focusing on Doctor of the Church, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini, and as I have already a bit, Flannery O'Connor. I'm currently most enamored with Saint Hildegard, so I'm going to talk about her first. The majority of her life took place over the 12th century. I believe her birth and death years were 1098 to 1172. She was something like 80 or 81 years old when she died. But she was the 10th child in her family, and as such, she wound up being tithed. Now, the concept of tithing a child was a lot more common back then. Usually the youngest son became a priest, and you might give one of your daughters away to be some kind of cloistered nun or something to that effect, so that the church could keep going. And Hildegard was chosen not because she was the youngest daughter, although she was, but because she started having visions when she was just 3 years old. And her mom really wasn't sure if she was loony or if she... Basically, she just really wasn't sure if she was crazy or if she was okay. And rather than risk her being some old spinster who, you know, never marries and people, you know, she gets this reputation for being super weird, she just said, you're gonna go be a nun. And she wound up going with a woman named Yuda. And Yuda was, I want to say 14 or 16 when this happened, and Hildegard was only 8. So she goes in with Yuda, who's basically twice her age, at 8 years old. Not totally willingly. I believe the term is cloistered nun. They literally walled her in at this monastery called Dizzy-Bodenberg. And Hildegard did not like it. She did not want this life. She wanted to go, like, run away and avoid this religious life, basically. And she kind of wanted to run away from her visions as well. She didn't really understand them. She didn't know what was going on. Initially, Yuda really took her in and was close to her. But in time, that sort of shifted. Jutta, as a person, was very obsessed with holiness, and she really, really wanted to die a saint. And this consumed her quite literally. She starved herself. She refused herself any luxuries. She would stay on her knees for days at a time until she literally collapsed. She only wore hair shirts. She cut all of her hair off. She cut off all of Hildegard's hair off. She was intense, and Hildegard wasn't that, right? You'll see this is a common thread of people thinking women should be a certain way and other women not being that way and being scorned essentially for it. Initially, Jutta was very close to Hildegard. She loved her very much, but one day this forest hermit is the only way I can think to describe her. This woman just decided, I'm done living in society, and she cloistered herself essentially, but into the woods, lived off of the land, all that stuff. She showed up to the monastery insisting she needed to talk to Jutta, and she told Jutta that this girl who was beneath her was one day going to outshine her, and that over time everybody would forget about Jutta, despite everybody knowing her now and acclaiming her now and going on these pilgrimages to meet her and see her now. Eventually, Hildegard, who has these visions, will outshine her, and Hildegard will be the one that everybody remembers, and nobody's going to remember Jutta. And this didn't sit very well with Jutta. So Jutta started to not be very close to Hildegard and would do everything she could to emphasize her own holiness and sort of push Hildegard away. This monastery that they lived at, Dizzy-Bodenberg, all of the men were obsessed with Jutta. They thought she was so holy and so wonderful. And Hildegard had a slightly different opinion. Being close to her, Hildegard realized that a lot of what Jutta was going through was sort of this yearning for death. She really wanted to be super holy, and she really wanted to die. She wanted to just go to heaven and get to be a saint, and that was her whole life. Hildegard obviously didn't see things quite that way. So after the death of Jutta, Hildegard starts talking more to this friend that she had made, a monk friend. His name was Volmar. Volmar was obsessed with Jutta, and he had befriended Hildegard when she was just a girl. They were very close at this time, but she started sharing more with him about her visions, and eventually she started to write these things down. And once this was discovered, it wasn't looked upon too favorably, and Hildegard wound up having to write to Saint Bernard of Clairvaux for help to convince these monk superiors to her to allow her to write these visions down because they're from God. And I won't go on to a whole tangent here of what her visions were and the art and writings and music and things that all came from her visions, but you absolutely need to go look them up because they are incredible. They're like nothing else I've ever seen. They're just brilliant and they're wonderful, and there's so many amazing, miraculous things behind her art. Just go look it up. But anyhow, she writes to Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who initially doesn't quite help her, at least she doesn't think so, but eventually she gets in front of the Pope, and between the Pope and the help she does get from Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, she is granted ability to write, and Saint Hildegard manages to convince the Pope to let her and her other sister nuns below her take over this monastery in Rupertsberg that had been abandoned. So they could leave behind this male monastery that had never wanted to take on women anyway and go into their own monastery, sort of recuperate Rupertsberg and live there and do good there. And that is essentially what she did. And in her time working or living and working out of Rupertsberg, she writes so many books, songs. Obviously, she's creating art. She argues with male leaders like the Pope. She writes letters. She tells people, this is wrong, or this could be better, or we need to do things differently. And I know that today it doesn't seem that wild, but when you think about living in the 1100s, it's absolutely crazy that she did stuff like this. She was the first woman ever permitted to teach. Let that sink in for a minute. The first woman ever permitted to teach by the Pope himself. Hildegard was absolutely brilliant, and it's shocking because it's not like she came from incredible wealth or something. It's not like she was educated properly prior to going into this monastery. Actually, Yuda was the one who taught her how to read and how to write Latin and all these other things. Like, she was just a girl, and yet she was this absolutely formidable mind, and obviously had these incredible visions from God, and she was just so completely gifted by the Lord. It's insane. And there's a story from the end of her life that's really similar to everything Cabrini did. So towards the end of her life, Hildegard did something that she had basically been doing the entire time she was alive, but it reminds me in particular of Cabrini. And if you've seen the movie, at the very least, you will understand why it reminds me of Cabrini. So long story short, these monks harmed another monk because they insisted that he had done wrong and had been excommunicated, which was true. But they basically harmed him within an inch of his life. And so he somehow gets to Rupertsberg, where Hildegard is. And again, she's this elderly woman. And she and her sisters there take care of him in hospice until he eventually passes away. And before he dies, he is made right with the church again. So she gives him a Christian burial on the grounds at Rupertsberg. Well, these monks and the archbishop basically said, you cannot do that. This man was excommunicated. He cannot be buried in sacred ground. You need to disinter him. And she absolutely refused to do this. She's like, I won't. He was made right with the Lord before he died. I'm not going to take him out of the ground. He got a Christian burial. That's exactly what he deserves. Eventually, the archbishop sent a bunch of monks over to basically force his disinterment. So Hildegard, who would have been absolutely wrong to refuse to allow them to come or to refuse to allow them in as a woman, as a nun, below these men, these monks, these religious, she said, fine, you can come and you can get him, go ahead. But she and her sisters toiled all of the land in the graveyard, and they chiseled off all of the markings on every single gravestone in that graveyard, so that when they arrived and she said, go ahead, go find him, go take him, they simply couldn't do it. And she wound up being able to argue her case and provide evidence and witnesses for the fact that this man was, in fact, reunited with the Lord before his death. And all was well after that. But in that duration of time, she underwent these harsh sanctions. Basically, they were not allowed to sing at Rupertsberg. There were all these really cruel things were done. And she refused to give in. She knew what the right thing to do was. And even though she refused to disobey, she was able to creatively think about what to do to make sure the right thing was done. And that completely reminds me of Cabrini. If you've seen the movie, again, I also saw that movie. I also promoted that movie. It's really great. Cabrini was, if you don't know, an Italian sister who the Pope asked to go to New York to take care of the Italian immigrants in New York, who at the time were very much hated. And they primarily lived in this part of New York called Four Points. And it was extremely dangerous. These Italians were living in poverty, super, super poor, didn't even have adequate health care. If they tried to go to a normal hospital, they would be turned away. It was heinous. It was a human rights violation, right? So Cabrini comes into this mess, and she is underneath the Bishop of New York, who winds up having to play a lot of politics between his flock of Catholics, what Cabrini's trying to do, and the mayor. Of course, Cabrini has big dreams. You see that she wants to actually go to Asia to do a lot of work in Asia and serve underserved Catholic communities there, but the Pope had asked her to go to New York. So in New York, she's doing this work that she wants to do as a very ambitious woman. In fact, one of her most famous quotes is, "The world is too small." The world isn't big enough for what she wants to do. She's super ambitious and ready to just tackle any project that she takes on. But because the people of New York and the mayor are super hostile toward Italians, she can't do what any reasonable person would think to do. And because the bishop has to take care of his flock and please the mayor of New York so that he doesn't make any missteps that cause the mayor to turn against all Catholics, as opposed to just the Italian Catholics that he was currently against, And so one of the things this bishop tells Cabrini is that she can't ask the people of New York for money to help take care of the Italians. So she doesn't. She says, fine, I won't ask them. She befriends a journalist, gets this journalist to write an article detailing how horrible the conditions in 4 Points are. And the people of New York wind up sending her money. And so she comes around, in the movie at least, is a scene with the bishop where she says, hey, I didn't ask them for money. They just came to me. And that is the exact point that I feel women are called to make. Okay, women are not meant to only be meek, humble, gentle, shrinking violets. Okay, yes, there are the Saint Therese of Lisieux, little flower women, absolutely necessary, absolutely beautiful and brilliant. Saint Therese of Lisieux is a doctor of the church as well. But you contrast Saint Therese of Lisieux with Saint Hildegard, and they're just vastly, vastly different women. And yet they're equally pleasing to God. All of these women lived radically different lives, and yet all of them are equally pleasing to God. I feel like a lot of the conversation today around womanhood and femininity says that it has to look this way and there can be no deviations from it. Unless you want to be a nun, unless you want to enter the religious life, then you don't have to adhere to any of these things that come around the conversation of femininity. Of course, there will be some overlap, but it's okay that you don't have children. It's okay that you don't have a husband. It's okay that you, all of these things. But for anybody else, it's simply not okay, right? We're all right with religious women, like proper religious women, right? And we're okay with women who want to be stay-at-home mothers, wives, housekeepers, chicken collectors, okay? But what about all these other saints who were pleasing to the Lord? What about all these other women who live these brilliant lives and have these fantastic legacies that don't look like that? Even the distinction between Hildegard and Jutta back when they were alive was this way, and it's not okay. As women, we are called to be first and foremost the women God created us to be. But the end result isn't this one singular note of femininity, but rather it is a chorus of notes all coming together in the curious but consummate cacophony of creation. Do not be afraid of womanhood that looks different than the Protestant American ideal. Do not be afraid of becoming the saint God asks you to be by means different than those of other sisters in Christ. We're all supposed to be eking out our salvation in fear and trembling, and we're not always going to do it perfectly, but that's not the point. The point is to try. The point is to live every single day for the Lord and to ask for His will to be done, even if His will for us isn't trendy or popular or readily accepted. All of these women, including Flannery, were all pushed back upon. They were all asked why they couldn't just be something easier to swallow. But those women refused to shrink back down. That is what made them great. That is what made them brilliant. That is what made them memorable. And that is what made them obedient to the will of God. I don't feel like this is the end of talking about this topic, but I think this is a good stopping point. I hope that you got something really brilliant out of this. Please comment down below. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me your feelings. Tell me what this stirs up inside of you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you love it? Do you hate it? I want to talk about it. I want there to be a different conversation happening around femininity. I want everybody to know it is okay to be a completely different woman than the one described at the very beginning of this video. And I want you to know that if you are the woman described at the very beginning of this video, you are brilliant, you are wonderful, you are fabulous. I love you. I am proud of you. And I am also proud if you're completely different from her, okay? I love you. God loves you. Femininity can be so many beautiful, brilliant, different things. And that is the point I want everyone to take away from this video. And speaking of brilliant and different women, we have to come back to this video's sponsor, which is Wild Catch, the movie about Flannery O'Connor's life and stories, which is in theaters this month in May. It's artsy, it's fantastic, I love it. I highly recommend you go see it. You won't regret it. Check the link in the description to find out which theater near you has tickets. Check it out and let me know what you think.